Max Olson, ESPN.com, with us on 365 Sports. Max, we appreciate it. In your opinion, anything in particular, not rattle your cage, but anything in the portal that has kind of caught your attention more than anything else?
I think we still haven't heard a lot of names that are expected to go in here when this opens up in a couple of weeks. But I do think that it's gonna be an interesting period because I think a lot of teams kind of tried to address all of their needs in December and kind of go on their spending sprees during that window. And so expectation from talking to a lot of GMs is that there's maybe not as much need and desperation this time around, but I think at the same time, this is kind of the last chance to go really spend on those last few guys here before this goes under a salary cap. So interested to see, do we see some big names move? We usually don't see quarterbacks move, obviously, in the spring. But for those teams that have national championship ambitions, what are those last few players they need to go get, and how premium a player can you find?
Max, do you it's so hard to even gauge because most people want to be at their new school at the beginning of the semester. So what would have to happen in the spring to get somebody to really be prompted to leave that would make them attractive, other than they just waited to the spring and they were going to be attractive no matter what? Because most people in the portal now will have lost starting jobs. So to me, that's just filling up the back of my roster.
Yeah, and I also think from a financial standpoint, if you wanted to make a move this offseason, you should have gone in December, because that was when teams were had a lot more money to spend with all of this house settlement money that they could start allocating for next year. And so now that the money's a little bit more tight, if a guy's going now, it's sort of well, why didn't you go in December? But there's always going to be those situations where either a guy is falling behind on the depth chart, or he just gets to a place and the role was maybe not what he was promised when he was recruited and things like that. You are going to have kind of those depth chart things, and you're going to certainly have coaches cutting guys too as they try to get down to 105 here. That rule is going to kind of go into effect by week 1, so you got to get your roster down to 105. And I think the expectation is most people are going to go to 85 scholarship players, and it's not going to be hugely different from the past, but you're going to have to cut some walk-ons here before we get to the end of August.
Max, I'm sure, and I think we probably asked you in one of your recent appearances about your thoughts on just the changing of spring schedules, games, the way it's being viewed now in light of the portal and all of that. Dion and Fran Brown obviously looking to get a waiver to try to practice together, but we just saw Mike Gundy proposing, a whole relationship with Oklahoma where they, go back and forth each spring and have practices together and all of that. Just kind of what feedback have you gotten on the whole idea? How popular of an idea do you think it is? And what are your thoughts on this reimagining of spring, and even going so far as to have, an Oklahoma State Bedlam set of practices, if at all possible?
I mean, the pitch from Mike Gundy, who says no? I think I love the idea. Obviously, these coaches don't want to go live and they don't want to have injuries and season-ending injuries. So, that's obviously a piece of it. You're not going to really try to go through a real game against a real opponent. But in terms of being able to kind of do that NFL thing of mixed practices against another program, like Deion Sanders and Fran Brown talking about, I love the concept. I think if teams are willing to do it, obviously in basketball you have, teams do those kind of closed door scrimmages and stuff like that. This goes on. Why can't we figure this out for football? Obviously there's red tape and there's rules and there's things like that stand in the way. But I think certainly the Bedlam point is a great point, because obviously those ADs are kind of stubbornly sticking to the non-conference schedules that they have set up, and there's not a lot of motivation for those schools to schedule each other here in the future. So why don't we do something in the spring and raise money that can go to NIL and things like that? I would love to see those things happen. And obviously it plays into a larger conversation about well, why can't we rethink this stuff? Because 15 practices and a spring game is not exactly what everyone's really looking for at this point.
Max, we tend to, fans, media, whoever, maybe even the industry, react quickly to something without really a long enough trend. For example, the college football playoff after the first game, Indiana, Notre Dame, oh my God. And then, even the NCAA tournament, there's not enough mid-majors. What's going on? Is it the portal? In the transfer portal for college football, will there be a limit, or will there eventually be maybe something that rounds off where it doesn't continue to go higher and higher what it costs to bring in players in the portal?
Do you mean the cost, or do you mean the number of players that go in the portal?
Or either what? Let's say the number of players. Will that eventually kind of calm down, or is it always going to be? I saw a note. That doesn't mean they all were in the portal, but like West Virginia and a bunch of other teams were in that 50-plus range on new players on their roster. Could be high school players they signed. But do you think that'll eventually slow down a little bit?
I don't think the keeping a player, like a player can't leave. They're locked in for multiple years. They can't go in the portal. I just don't think we're going to get to that point until there's collective bargaining. I really don't. I just think that the way this continues to trend, obviously the NCAA likes the compromise of the one-time transfer rule, and then letting grads transfer. I think they sort of like that as hey, let's just agree to this. We can stop doing all the BS around waivers. You get one, the next ones you got to sit out. I think administrators were fairly okay with that compromise. And then obviously a year ago, you get that struck down, and now it's a free-for-all in every sport. And I just don't know how you're going to be able to, put the toothpaste back in the tube there until this truly is, there's a players union and there's collective bargaining and there's actual, enforceable contracts. I just don't really see how we get there. The portal numbers go up every year. Certainly they're going to try to limit the spending with the House settlement and the caps here going forward. But I think we all know that is inevitably and probably pretty quickly going to get challenged in court as well.
Yeah, Max, I'm constantly befuddled by the college football leadership knowing that there's an answer to their problems. They know what it is. They don't want it, but to me now it would be like going to the doctor and said, "Listen, we're gonna have to fix your knee. Like you've got a torn ACL and all this stuff, or you're not gonna be able to walk." And they're like, "No, I'll shake it off." Well, eventually there'll be another thing. Like collective bargaining is the only way to solve this problem. Shouldn't they just get behind it at this point?
Well, obviously that is the ultimate fight still is not wanting student athletes to be classified as employees. And that is, they are still, I don't know what year we're on now. It's been several years of trying to persuade DC to, help you with legislation so that you can kind of solve the antitrust problem here. When you talk to coaches and GMs, they're not going to say this publicly, but privately, I think there's some acknowledgement of you know what, in the next couple of years here, they're probably going to be employees. It's probably going to change, and in some ways, maybe that's better, right? I'm not saying it's simple. It's obviously easier said than done, but I do think there's some recognition that that's coming down the road here. Now, what are the steps that it takes to actually activate that? That's still going to be a knockdown, drag out process. But I do think we are inching closer to just accepting the inevitability there.
Max, there was a little bit of coaching news. Troy Taylor is out at Stanford. GM Andrew Luck, which is weird to say that, but that's just all the rage now. But GM Andrew Luck making that decision since they have a situation also with the athletic director spot. So just your thoughts on the timing of it, the ill-fated Taylor tenure, and now what you think about that job moving forward.
Craig, when you say GM Andrew Luck, does it make you feel old?
It does, yes. Very much so, yes.
Yeah, definitely unusual situation there when you have an outgoing athletic director in Bernard Muir. So essentially Andrew Luck kind of having kind of the autonomy to say, I'm going to look at this program and I'm going to look at the issues that we've had so far and make a determination here that this is not the guy to move forward. Very interested to see what Stanford does. Obviously They could lose players to the portal here. They've still got some good players that could definitely entertain that, and I'm sure are currently being recruited. Obviously I feel like we always have one of these every year, and usually you kind of like maybe go more of an interim route here. So will Stanford kind of look for a 1-year solution here, or are they going to run a full coaching search and can find someone that can really bring that job back to being? I mean, you remember at the peak of David Shaw,
Yep.
That was an extremely competitive, you would say almost playoff level program for quite a while there. And so, ACC is a whole different beast for them, but very interested to see what they can do in terms of finding a coach who can stabilize things there. And, I think that's one of those programs that certainly intentionally fell behind on NIL and has fallen behind on a lot of the rule changes and stuff. And I think Andrew Luck is going to have to play a really critical role there in terms of bringing them up to speed and making them competitive in a conference where certainly at the very top, you've got programs that are willing to spend a lot of money.
Have you ever followed that? Is it a parody account with Andrew Luck as the general?
Yeah.
When he writes home to his mother.
Yes.
He's
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
He did one of those for the change at Stanford in football, too. I thought it was great. Max, general manager, you mentioned this. Nothing anymore, like, you think we'll ever see this? I don't think we could ever say, no, there's no way, because of all that's changed. Can you ever see where a general manager in football runs that department and actually peels part of that away from the athletic director's office?
Well, I think the Andrew Luck example is it's honestly, I mean, again, a little bit unusual because of the athletic director situation, but I do think we've seen, that's one of several examples I think we've seen this offseason where the general manager is coming in and that person has been hired by the athletic director. I mean, obviously the football coach is going to sign off on it and you want the football coach to feel comfortable with it. But I think we are seeing examples this offseason, and you can point to like USC and Oklahoma and others too that have brought in GMs where it's like, okay, they're reporting to the AD and, that this person is going to be here regardless of whether we go through a coaching search. And that's pretty unusual, obviously, in recent history for college football, where these staffs are always kind of tied together and they win together or they lose together, they get fired together. I think if we transition to a world where those guys are kind of mainstays, and even if we have problems with the coaching staff, we fire him. The GM is still here and still managing this roster. I think that certainly creates a different dynamic and one where you have, it's not just like a front office in name, but one that has some decision making power. So interested to see kind of how those evolve, because that's always been, there's still a lot of programs where the head coach is really the final say on roster and players and that kind of decision making. But certainly we are empowering more and more guys like Luck, who are going to have a little more say so than just the director of player personnel.
Max, back to Troy Taylor for a second. It seemed at the time to me like they kind of settled on it because he didn't have to move very far. Like he was right there in their area, because Stanford doesn't really know what they want to be right now, do they?
Well, it's tough. I want to say it was like him and maybe Jason Garrett. I'm trying to remember who else was in the mix at that time. Troy Taylor actually, to his credit, they were successful at the FCS level at Sacramento State. And actually in his final year there, they had Scadaboo as his running back. So obviously they were able to find some pretty good players out there. And now that program is turning over again with Brendan Marion taking it over. But I do think it's tough. Like, I think the intellectual brutality, kind of the we want to be, a high level academic program that's also, producing, power teams, and linemen and backs. And like, I think David Shaw and before him, Jim Harbaugh, obviously, they did a pretty impressive job of building the brand of here's what we're going to do. And they were able to recruit at a high level when they won Rose Bowls and when they won a lot of games there. They put together great recruiting classes, with McCaffrey and all the guys they had there. But yeah, I just think the job has changed a ton over there in the last 5 years. And, obviously, became very difficult for David Shaw to maintain it. And, now you're in a conference that, just out of necessity, just to stay in the mix here. I think it's you could argue it's the most challenging power forward job out there. In when you factor in the disadvantages, but at the same time, like, you got some recent success, and that's, you would think, is enough to draw a coach that really believes in himself.
Yeah, they had Plunkett win the Heisman. Elway was there. Christian McCaffrey was I think was in New York when they announced the year he was leaving, and Bill Walsh, Jim Harbaugh, Dennis Green. And you mentioned David Shaw. When I thought about Stanford
Toby
football,
Gerhardt.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How could I forget him?
Touchdown, Tommy Vardell.
There you go. They had a team
Richard Sherman.
that played a pro style most of the time, and they just seemed like, that they were always very competitive, but it just seemed like they have slipped, no doubt. The way that college football enters now, the spring, the drills, the games, or whatever, do you see whether or not the portal would change? Will it be one time and not twice? Will it change because if college football changes spring football and moves it more into a pro format?
Do I think we'll get away from the spring portal?
Yes.
Is what you're asking?
Yes.
It's a great question, and one that I've definitely asked people around the sport about. I don't know that, there's the proposal from the AFCA of like, hey, let's move this to January. I think that's one where you view that as, hey, this protects the postseason a little bit more, that you hopefully don't have the situations we saw, for example, Bo Prabula, the back quarterback at Penn State, transferring to Missouri, of like guys having to leave playoff teams to go make their moves. I think that's the thing that coaches obviously want to prevent and get very frustrated about. So I think there's there's that pitch that they put forward at their convention in January. To me though, it's one of those conversations that like it's like just one piece of the whole like broken puzzle. Like you could say, hey, let's go to one portal date and not do spring and all that. I don't think it fixes the fact that the whole calendar is messed up, and I think that's just going to have to be part of kind of overhauling the whole thing. I talked to one GM a couple weeks ago who suggested, like, what if we just did the portal in February, and then you don't have that pressure of getting guys into school, and you can have they can take their time in terms of making visits. Coaches can take their time. That would be after the draft decisions and all that, so you kind of know what your needs are. Like, can we do this in maybe a little bit more of a low pressure way? But when you talk about stuff like that, it's like, okay, but in that scenario, we're changing our whole calendar from December to July, right? Like that's part of a larger overhaul there, because you have to take a very different approach to spring practice and all that. So like, I think there's maybe a future where there's just one portal period. I think that's common sense to a lot of people. But right now, I think coaches still like having the ability to get guys at the end, and address those needs at post spring when they have injuries and stuff like that. So it's like you understand the overall, like, man, this is dumb. The NFL doesn't do 2 free agency periods. Why does college? But I do think it's like one of those things that it's just part of the larger conversation of this whole thing needs to get fixed. And if fixing it includes just having one portal period, I think people would be happy with that. But I don't think so far there's a magical solution to it.
We had Craig Bull from the AFCA on. It's been 2 or 3 weeks. Of course, that's located here about a mile from where we broadcast our podcast. And one of the things did any coaches sit in any of the meetings when they decided when they would have the portal? Or is that just like administrators, presidents, ADs? Did anyone ask the coaches for their opinion? Do they ever really have them in those same, where someone could say, hey, like, for example, the Sweet 16s decided the next day the portal's open in basketball, which is nuts to me. Maybe it's just me, but does any of the do they ever ask those who might be affected more than anybody else?
I mean, I believe that coaches and ADs have some voice on the football oversight committee, and that's a step in the process of getting these things eventually in front of the Division I council who makes those decisions. But certainly you hear that refrain all the time, especially when you go to the AFCA convention in January, of like these coaches, 60 to 70 of them show up and get in a room together. And I think that you frequently hear them kind of say like, well, nobody's asking us, or nobody's listening to our input or taking our voice seriously on this stuff. And I think that's a constant fight for coaches. I know Todd Berry felt that way and was kind of trying to fight to gain ground on these fronts and wanting their point of view represented as we modernize these things. And, I think that's a frustration for coaches, especially with how quickly things change, and how quickly things have changed really since 2020 with COVID. So I just think, like basketball going on right now, it's crazy. And I'm sure there's reasons why they came up with that. But it almost puts the teams that are still playing, it almost burns them a little bit and becomes a disadvantage.
Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
You saw where St. Francis, Division I basketball team, small school, small campus, decided to opt down to Division III. Can you ever see the 31 or so Division I FBS football teams, any of them, maybe not now, maybe letting the dust settle with the House settlement? Can you see that happening at that level, opting down?
Well, not for the power, unless we just have like more like crazy realignment and more schools just straight up get left out of this stuff the way that Oregon State and Washington State did, where you just don't have the TV money to compete. For a group of 5 schools, like I do think that's you're going to have some pretty tough conversations over the next few years about how do we afford this stuff. And I think even for Power 4 schools, that's been a conversation over the past years. Like, okay, yes, we can give this much money to these student athletes. Where are we getting that money from? And so, yeah, like I do think that is going to be a topic. I don't think that we're going to necessarily see a bunch of G5 schools suddenly drop off the map, but I do think that, it's all easier said than done when it comes to paying the student athlete. Like I know, like we see them waste money every year on stuff, right? And we sort of say like, well, why haven't they been paying the players when coaches' salaries go up, facilities go up, all this kind of stuff. But obviously it's a pretty messed up business that's been trying to break even forever. And so when you have to adjust to this new model, you've got schools that just are not very equipped to be competitive. So yeah, you kind of understand it at a lower level. How do like, we have to comply with this, but what does that look like? I do think that that's a thing that over the next 5 to 10 years, and then as we get into TV deals again down the road, stuff like that. There's going to be some schools that just have to be honest that they do not have the funds to live in this new world.
Thank you, Max. Appreciate your time. Max Olson, ESPN.com, where there's a lot all in the middle of it.